Hello, everybody. It's Judy. Hello, everybody. It's Judy in San Antonio, going live for the first time on here. I'm going to try to do our lesson on Exodus today live. I don't know how to edit the videos that I've been doing, so then I have to go back and watch them, and then I have to download them. This time, I'm just going to do it live. We'll pick up a few new people, and I'm not going to probably do our steps of creation, fall, flood, nations 4,000 years ago like last time. I won't add to those. I'll probably do those every other lesson as we grow them. But I will continue using the cute little poetry book that I've been using with my grandson, and it covers each book of the Old Testament. And I want to show you a really cool old book. My grandfather gave this to me when I was in like six years old, first or second grade. Now, it's kind of in bad shape because that makes it about 70 years old. And I left it outside under a tree and it rained on it and it's kind of in bad shape. But what is so cool about it? Every Bible story is in here in sequential order and with really cool pictures too. And then in the back, for every lesson there are questions, so this is a really good book to see if you understood what you read. Then you go to the back and have somebody read you the question and the answers are right there in dark print. And when I was a little girl, I read through this thing all the time and would go back there. I'd pretend I was a teacher, teach the lesson, go back and ask the questions. And it's a really cool old book. I'm so proud of it. And my boys and I have read through it together when I was homeschooling both Nikki and Toby. And then Toby and I have used it a little bit this year. And it's Hurlbut Story of the Bible for Young and Old, deluxe edition. And it is copyrighted in the 1940s, I believe. Uh, I think my grandfather gave it to me in about 56. 19, oh, said 1947. So, and I mean, as I open it up, part of, it's just falling apart. But I've got it all taped up so it can kind of stay together. There's a great introduction, but let me show you some of the pictures. This is Abram and the angel telling him that he was going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. We had that in the last, I believe we got to it the last time. And here is Pharaoh honoring Joseph. Remember, Joseph told him what the dream was about the famine and he should gather stuff together. And then today's pictures that we'll be covering is the Pharaoh's daughter finding baby Moses. I love these old pictures. I really do. Here are pictures of the Egyptians being cruel taskmasters over the Israelis. The Hebrews is what they were called. Anyway, it's a neat old book. Neat old book. So, and then of course, I have my drill Bible, one with no helps in it at all, because so that you could say, attention, present Bibles, Exodus, since that's what we're studying today. Open, flip to Exodus, put your finger in, step forward. And if they call on you, you say Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus. You give the book before and the book behind it. And so we will be starting Exodus today. So let's see what our poetry book says about Exodus. In Exodus, we learn of Moses, a baby saved from the Nile. He grew up as a prince of Egypt, though his people were slaves all the while. But God had a plan for Moses to free the Hebrews. So he sent him to plead at Pharaoh's court, let my people go. And when we go do our our signs. When we get to Moses, he'll go, Moses, let my people go. No, that's three of our signs that we'll get to eventually. Um, with signs and wonders and mighty acts, God led his people out. Through stormy sea and wilderness, we hear their excited shout. On to Mount Sinai they came, God's holy mountain of mighty fame. There Moses went up to learn God's law. When he came down again, oh, what a sight he saw. His people worshiped a calf of gold. Moses was angry and had to scold. Well, we know Exodus is all about the Hebrews in Egypt, getting out of Egypt, getting out into the wilderness, and getting the laws of God given to them on tablets of stone, and Him giving them directions and having to chastise them when they are disobedient. So let's just review 1 minute that we know there are 66 books in the Bible. 39 of them are in the Old Testament, and that's God's history with the Hebrews from creation until they have been scattered throughout the world. And we know that in that 39, we have 5 books of beginning, and it was 5 books of beginning and creation, 12 books of history of the Israel nation, and then we've got 5, that was 12, 5 books of poetry and wisdom, 5 books of major prophets, which are Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel, Daniel, my favorite book. And then we get 12 books of minor prophets: Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi, and the last book, Malachi. Yeah. And then we have 400 to 500 years of silence from God, and we don't have any new writings. Then we get 27 books of the New Testament. 27, 39 makes 66. Now, in the New Testament, it's broken down 4 books of good news, Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. And then we have 1 book of history. In the Old Testament, we had 12 books of history. This one we have 1, and it was written by Dr. Luke. And it's about the Acts of the disciples and starting the first church and scattering it around the world. Okay? And then after Acts, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts, we could start the 13 letters of Paul to all the churches, most of them in Turkey, and some of them to people, individual people. Okay, so those 13 are Romans, written to the church in Rome. Romans, 1st and 2nd Corinthians to the church in Corinth, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, Galatians, Galatia, Ephesians, Ephesus, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, which is Philippi, Colossians, Colossae. Now, I always in Bible drill thought of those 4 there, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, as GE Power Company. GE, Galatians, Ephesians, Power Company, Philippians, Colossians, to keep them in order between the next ones that start 1 and 2, 1 and 2 again. So it was Romans, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians to the church in Thessaloniki. We always say Thessalonica, but I went to Greece and they say Niki, Thessaloniki. Then 1st and 2nd Timothy, Titus, and Philemon, about the slave that ran away to Rome and got saved and became a helper of Paul. Okay, that's the end of Paul's letters that we know of. However, the next books are, and I believe there are 8, I'll have to count them, 8 letters, epistles by different people. We don't know who wrote Hebrews. It's in the form of a lot of Paul's letters, but it just doesn't say from Paul the apostle, I love with all my love, like he normally did. But it's written a whole lot. So it could be Paul's. Maybe we should have 14 books. But since we can't prove it's Paul, we call it a general letter. Hebrews, James, First and Second Peter, written by Peter, First and Second, Third John, Jude. Yes, that was 8 books. Jude is the last general letter. And then we only have one prophecy book, whereas in the Old Testament, we had 17. We have one prophecy book, Revelation, written by John the Apostle on his time being exiled to the island of Patmos. And we will eventually, maybe take 6 years, but eventually we are going to get that far in this survey. So today we're going to start with Exodus, and I'm going to keep my little drill Bible here and kind of work our way through like we did last week based on the titles at the top of the chapters. And the first chapter tells us how oppressed the Jews are, the Hebrews are in Egypt, and what has happened to Joseph and his family, and how long a time it's been. They go back over the 12 brothers' names again, the tribes of Israel, and they talk about a new king has come up. So the king that was there when Joseph came, of course, has long gone since then. And these been so many kings since then called pharaohs that they don't remember Joseph, and his people have been put into bondage. They're no longer being treated like the good shepherds and given their own land. They have now, the king, the pharaoh, got scared that they might outnumber the real culturally correct Egyptians and side with the enemies of Egypt. So he wants them to start killing all the boy babies when they're born. And after a while, he realizes the midwives are not doing that. So he calls them in and says, "Why are you not killing the boy babies like I told you to?" When the Hebrews have a boy baby, they say, "Oh, they're not like other women. They can have their babies before we even get there. They're strong. They're working hard. They built up their muscles. They don't need us to deliver their babies. So we don't always know they've had a boy baby." Well, he really did not like that at all. So he declared that all boy babies would be drowned, and he threatened the midwives. Well, there was a married couple there in chapter 2 from the tribe of Levi, which is your priestly tribe. And the woman was, and she got pregnant by her husband, and they had a little boy. And she wasn't about to go drowning. The closest he was going to get to the river is be put in a little boat of bulrushes. So she gave birth to a son, and she saw he was a strong boy, good looking. She kept him for 3 months. And then when she couldn't hide him any longer, she built a papyrus basket and covered it with tar and pitch. And she put him in the river along the banks of the Nile, and told his sister to stand at a distance and see what happens. Well, what happened was Pharaoh's daughter, the princess, came for a bath with all of her waiting ladies, and they, of course, discovered the baby in the basket, and she opened it and she saw the baby. He was crying, and she felt sorry for him, and she knew immediately that he was a Hebrew baby. Her dad had declared all boy babies would be what? Drowned in the Nile. And here was a baby in the Nile, but in a basket, and he wasn't drowning. And oh, he's so cute. And so she says, "I'm going to keep this baby. It's one of the Hebrew babies. I'm going to adopt him." Well, the sister, who's been hiding, comes forward and says, "Would you like me to find a Hebrew nurse for him to help you out?" And she said, "Oh, yes, I really would." Now, I've often wondered, this princess is probably not an idiot. Do you think that maybe she realized that girl was this baby's real sister and that she would go get the real mommy? We don't know, but I just like to think that she did, that she knew that baby is going to be taken care of by his real mommy who could nurse him. And so when he got older, then his real mommy took him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. And she named him Moses, which means I drew him out of the water. So Moses was raised in a palace as the king's grandson. I don't know however many other grandsons there were or however many children the king had. I mean, he may have had several children with grandchildren. Moses may not have been the only grandchild, but he was educated like all the rest. He lived in luxury. And evidently, they didn't keep the truth from him because he seemed to know that, and maybe his real mommy told him when she was nursing him. But anyway, he seemed to know that they were his people. And so in chapter 2, we get him hidden, we get him adopted, we get him raised up, and we get him turned into a murderer. When he sees an Egyptian beating one of the Hebrews and he realizes he's of that group, he killed him. And he thought he could hide the body and nobody would see him kill him in the sand and nobody would be any the wiser. Now, none of the heroes of the Old Testament are heroes because of they're so good. And this shows this is a murderer that God is going to raise up to be someone great. Yeah. And so the next day, he thinks nobody knows it, but the next day he saw two Hebrews fighting and he tried to break them up. And they said, "Oh, you're going to kill us like you did the Egyptian yesterday?" Oh, so that there were people that knew, and the gig was up. He had been found out. And so he runs away to the wilderness. And because he doesn't want to be arrested, he doesn't want to get the death penalty himself. He thought for sure that if any of the Hebrews had seen him protecting them, they'd protect him, but they didn't. They resented him. They thought he was trying to lord it over them when actually he was one of them. So he runs away and he goes into the wilderness and he goes to work for a man who was a landowner out in the desert or the wilderness. And he marries that man's daughter, Zipporah, or some people say Zipporah, some say Zipporah. So Moses marries Zipporah, and they have a son, and Moses names him Gershon, saying, "I have become an alien in a foreign land." So Gershon must mean alien in a foreign land. And during that long period of time, which is 40 years, the king of Egypt dies. The Israelites call out to the Lord, groaning about their slavery, crying out for help to be saved by God. And God hears them. And he remembers his covenant that he will be their God and they will be his people. He remembers what he told Abraham, that you will be a great nation in this promised land and that you will have more children than the stars in the sky and the sand on the sea. And so God looks on the Israelites and he's concerned about them. And I think one version says he has compassion on them. So now we go back to Moses. Now, Moses killed the man when he was 40 and escaped to the desert. It's been 40 years later and he's 80 years old. Now, in my mind, I'm 73. 80's an old man, but he's still got energy. He's still in good shape. And he's been tending his flock of sheep for his father-in-law, Jethro, there in Midian. And he's up on a mountain taking care of them, Mount Horeb. And all of a sudden, he sees something strange. He sees a bush that's on fire. Now, in a wilderness, if a bush catches on fire, what happens? It spreads, right? Like wildfire, right? Wilderness wildfire. And it would take off and start burning things down. He'd have to get his sheep out of there. But this bush was different. It was burning, but it wasn't turning to ash. It was like it kept exploring, but there's fire coming out of it. And so he starts to go up to this bush and see what it is, this strange sight. And the Lord saw him, and God called to him from within the burning bush, Moses, Moses. I can't even imagine how scared you would be at that moment. And Moses said, "Here I am." "Do not come any closer," God said. "Take off your sandals, for this place where you are standing is holy ground. You are standing in holy ground. I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob." And at this, Moses hid his face. Supposedly, if you saw God, you would die. So he hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. He didn't want to die. And the Lord says, "I have indeed heard the misery back in Egypt from your people and my people, my special chosen people, and I have come to save them from slavery. And you, Moses, are going to be their leader. You're going to go back and talk to the king and tell him that he's to let the people go and that you're their leader, and that's it." And Moses says, "Well, I don't talk very good." God said, "You don't need to talk very good. You just need to be all powerful with the power I give you. And I will make sure you have somebody with you that does talk good. I'm going to let your real brother, come and be your mouthpiece." And so he said, "Well, what if the people don't believe you chose me?" He said, "See that staff in your hand, your shepherd's staff? Throw it on the ground." And Moses threw it on the ground, and it turned into a snake. Oh, imagine he was so scared. And God told him to pick it back up. So he reached down, picked it up, went back to being a staff. And he said, "When you show that to your people and you show that to the Pharaoh, they're going to believe you." And he was a reluctant leader. Moses really didn't want to do this. He really didn't. But how do you argue with God? And God says, "I'm going to be with you, and this will be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. And when you have brought the people out of Egypt, you're going to come back to this mountain to worship me." And his brother Aaron is going to be his mouthpiece when they go to talk to Pharaoh. And so they go and they assemble all the elders. And I have to say that the Hebrews were not as excited as I would have been. And if I had been groaning to God about my misery and he gave me a leader that's willing to go to the Pharaoh and lead me out, I would just been all for him. But they were a little bit reluctant. They weren't 100% behind him. He tells them about God coming to him and telling him what to do. And so he goes. He puts up some more stuff with God, but God always has an answer for him. So in the middle of chapter 4, he goes back to Egypt. And he tells the people, and they eventually say, okay. So he goes to the Pharaoh, and I'm trying to find my place here. There's some stuff going on between his father-in-law and him and the trip back to Egypt that you might want to open up to chapter 4 at the end and read more about that. But in the survey, we really don't have time to stop at every little thing in every little book because the survey is skimming it. So Moses and Aaron brought together all the elders of the Israelites, and Aaron told them everything the Lord had said to Moses, and he performed the signs that God had given them, and they believed. And when they heard that the Lord was concerned about them and had seen their misery, they bowed down and worshiped God. They may not be happy about Moses being the leader, but they still will worship God. Afterward, Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh. Now, they went to Pharaoh and gave the message the Lord gave. And Pharaoh says, "So who's this Lord? I'm king. I'm a god too, you know. Why should I listen to you?" And they said, "Well, the God of the Hebrews have met with us. And now let us take a 3-day journey into the desert to offer sacrifices to the Lord our God, so that he may strike us with plagues and with the sword." But the king of said, "No," just like our little hand sign's going to say. And Moses and Aaron, they don't give up. And so Pharaoh gets angry and he says no. And all he does is increase their work. Now they not only have to make the bricks, they have to gather all the straw and this stuff to make the brick. So now the Israelites are mad at Moses and Aaron because their work has just been increased. They were crying out from their mistreatment, and now it's even been worse. So God, Aaron and Moses, they go back to God, and God, each time Pharaoh says no, sends something miraculous for Moses to do that is called a plague, something awful that will affect everybody in the country except the Hebrews. And each time Pharaoh relents and then takes it back, relents and takes it back, relents and takes it back. And so we have all these plagues. We have the first one, they showed the power, was showing the snake, the rod thrown down. The real plague, though, was plague of blood. And all the water, the Nile River, turned to blood. You can't live without water. No, you can't. And then he sent the plague. Now remember, these are days apart. They're not all happening at once. Then you had the plague of frogs. You couldn't open your door. The frogs didn't come in your house. They jumped on your bed. They jumped in your food. Frogs were everywhere. I don't like frogs. The next one was a plague of gnats. Oh, have you ever bought fruit home and put it in your kitchen and maybe didn't touch it for a couple, 3 days? And then you go over to get a peach or an apricot or an orange or something out of the sack. And there are these little flying fruit flies everywhere. And they're just horrible. You just want to get rid of them. Well, they had gnats, which look like those little fruit flies, and they were like black in the sky. They were everywhere. You couldn't open your mouth if they weren't getting in your mouth or in your eyes. And the Egyptian people did not like those gnats at all. So then they said yes, they could go, they could leave, and then no, changed his mind. And so then it was the plague of flies. Now, my grandchildren who will not go on picnics because they do not want flies near their food. And if one fly gets in their house, it drives them nutty. So I have a fly swatter right over here, right to the right of me, just so that I can make sure that they'll eat whatever I fix them when they come, in case there happens to be a fly. Now, I haven't seen a fly in here for 3 months, but back in May, just when school was ending, there were like 3 flies in this house. And I didn't have a fly swatter, and Toby refused to eat his chicken. No, because they may have gotten in my chicken, the flies. And so before I could get him to eat here again, I had to give it a fly swatter, kill the flies, and tell him there's no more flies in my house. And now he eats here all the time. And that was back in May. So it's been 4 months and we haven't had any more flies. Okay. So you don't like flies. And if they come by the thousands, like they would have in a plague, it would have been awful. And then they had the plague of livestock. Okay. So what happens to the livestock? It was a terrible plague on the livestock in the field: horses, donkeys, camels, cattle, sheep, goats. But he didn't bring it to the animals of the Hebrews, the Israelite people, just the animals in Egypt. owned by Egyptians. And God set a time and a place, a time. And then the next day, the Lord did it. All the livestock of the Egyptians died. Hope they don't want any steak for lunch or hamburgers. All the livestock of the Egyptians died. How about milk? If all the livestock died, you couldn't get your goat's milk, your sheep's wool, any of your beef. Not one animal belonging to the Israelites died, though. Pharaoh sent men out to investigate, and they found that not even one of their animals had died. Yet his heart was unyielding, and he wouldn't let the people go. So then they got boils. Yeah. So Moses had to take handfuls of soot from a furnace, and he tossed it into the air in the presence of Pharaoh, and it will become fine dust over the whole land of Egypt, and festering boils will break out on men and animals throughout the land. You may say, what animals? They all died. It was their field animals that died. But they might still have dogs, cats. I don't know what else animals they would have, but their field animals are all dead. Now this is these animals that are alive are going to have boils, but not just the animals. All the men are going to have boils all throughout the land. Have you ever had a boil? I have never had a boil, but I saw some. When I was in elementary school, it seemed like there was I don't want to say a plague, but it kind of like when everybody gets the mumps and it goes from one person to the other, or measles. Well, this one girl got this big, oozy, yucky, bad spot on her elbow. And it festered and it oozed stuff, and it was just gross looking. And before long, several people got them on their hands. Yeah, so over the course of time they're running their course, and those kids going and get medicine, I saw several boils, and some on the elbows, some on the hands, some on the palms. I didn't ever see any on the face or neck or anything like that. But I can tell you, I sure would not want one. And I can't even imagine being an adult and you having these boils all over. Yeah. And then the next plague was hail, so that all their crops would be ruined. Hail comes down, ruins their roofs, ruins their crops. You have to stay in the house yourself. You don't want to be beat in the head by hail. And that still didn't stop the Pharaoh. So the next one was locust. Now I have a ringing kind of thing in my ear from my age, I think, and I hear a locust sound 24 hours a day. Luckily, when there's other noises around, I don't hear it that much unless it gets really, really quiet. But at night, if I don't turn the ceiling fan on or leave a TV on while I'm trying to go to sleep, my bedroom sounds like there's locusts everywhere. It goes, I mean, right now I can hear it. Well, locusts are louder than that, and it's a harsh sound. I can't make locust sounds, but they also eat all your crops. So even if the hail didn't get everything, maybe there was some of the trees survived or something. They will eat your trees. They'll kill your trees. They'll eat any leaves. They love to eat leaves. So they had a plague of locusts. I hear there is a plague of locusts in Africa right now that's really causing starvation. I thought they would usually come to one place and then move on, but evidently they've stayed there in Africa. We had a plague of locusts about 8-9 years ago in Amarillo, Texas, and I mean, they were everywhere. It was, but they only stayed there for maybe a week and a half to 2 weeks, and then they moved on. Here in San Antonio, we get twice a year, we get butterflies in big numbers like that coming through, and it's beautiful. People stop at intersections and take pictures of them. But it's when they're flying south, in the spring, and then when they're going, no, they're going south for winter, and then they go back north in the spring. So twice a year they go through San Antonio, and always the newspapers talk about it, and everybody's taking pictures, and they're very pretty. But butterflies are different than locusts. Butterflies don't make noise. Locusts make that horrible ringing sound that I have in my ear. And this was his last chance. He better let them go. Yes, he better, or something much worse is going to happen. Much, much worse. And since it's 35 minutes in, I'm going to leave you hanging till part 2 when we find out what the much, much worse thing is. I'm going to ask you guys to pray for my family. We're going through a really hard time right now with my sweet little Toby. Found out he has a disease he will have for the rest of his life, besides his diabetes. That's also going to require him to have leg surgery on both legs. And we're going to have to do something about some of us moving to a single story location, because he won't be able to go upstairs. He will be confined to a wheelchair for 6 weeks, and then he'll be in leg braces. And so pray for our family. He hasn't gone bananas on us. He's still my smiley face boy. He cried one time when he heard that if we don't find some place to live, he's going to have to go live with somewhere else with another parent, and who has a 1-story apartment, and be away from his mommy. But this little boy is very attached to his mommy, especially at night. Especially at night. He won't even hardly spend the night with me. He's with me all day, every day, but he doesn't want to be away from his mommy at night. And that's the only thing he's cried about. I mean, when I explained this illness to him, he was very upbeat and says, well, as long as my brain is still working on the left and right hand side, and I can still do math, and I can still do that little pinprick that's broken telling my legs to work, I think I can live with it. But of course, we haven't told him all the details of the surgery yet. He knows about the wheelchair, but he doesn't know some of the other details. And we may not tell him that, because maybe I can barely handle it myself. And I cried for around 48 hours, I imagine. So pray for us. It's going to be hard. And even one of his older brother was crying that day, because he said, I can't imagine Christmas being in a wheelchair, but he will be, because his surgery is not till December. So he'll go through Christmas and New Year's in the wheelchair. So y'all pray for us, and thank you for coming. Share this study with somebody you know that doesn't know the Bible well. I realize that you ladies, like in my Sunday school class, who have been going to church for 80 years, this is too elemental for them. But if you're a new Christian, or you know new Christians that are unfamiliar with the Bible, this will answer some of their questions and get them to know what led up to Jesus's birth, which is very important, because what is going on with these Hebrews shows God's power. He gives them laws. They can't keep them. They demand a king later on, and just over and over, they don't keep their part of the covenant, and God has to punish them. So finally, he sends our Savior, Jesus Christ, his son, to die on the cross for us, and then raises him from the dead, so that we know that if we trust in him, we too can raise from the dead in our spirit once our bodies go to sleep, quit working, get buried, turn back to dust, all those things, right? So if you know new Christians, baby Christians who really have questions about how the Bible's put together, and there's even some old-time Christians who really haven't studied their Bibles a lot, because they may belong to a denomination that they're not actually studying the Bible like some denominations do. They just listen to a priest talking, and they don't actually get into the Word. Even those people, even if they have loved the Lord their whole life, maybe needs help in getting into the Word. Because sometimes when you get into the Word and you see the truth through your own eyes, what you read, it changes where you go to church. You look for a church that's preaching the Word. So anyway, I pray that you'll come back next time, and thank you for joining me today. Bye-bye.